Hey, I'm Josie Haines, the Platform Engineering Director at Tile, and today I really want to chat with you about engineering with empathy. So, I truly feel that empathy is what's going to define the great companies of the future that have really truly figured out how to fill the needs of our diverse world. Technology and Apple's Health Kit, it didn't actually include menstruation cycles when it was first released. And so, without a diverse workforce creating technology, we're really valuable skills in your tool set. And so, engineers are constantly giving each other feedback and other team members feedback and attempting to collaborate on projects. But you're not encouraged to learn empathy, which will actually make those things much easier for you. So, I'm here to try to change that. And hopefully, you're going to leave here today with realizing why empathy is something that's important to learn and some new tools that you can actually use on a daily basis to build more empathy in your engineering practices. First, let's take a step back and define empathy. Brene Brown, a shame and empathy researcher, defines empathy as being made up of four components. The first one, being able to see the world as others see it. So, as engineers, can we really see the world through the lens of all of our potential customers as well as our diverse coworkers? The second one is being non judgmental. It's so easy to point fingers and play the blame game. Hell, we even have a command called get blame to figure out who committed some code. But what if instead of blaming others and shaming them, we proceeded with positive intent? Hey, our colleagues are also trying to deliver their best. And maybe there was a reason they wrote that code that way. What about being curious instead of jumping the gun? Next, the third component is really understanding another person's feelings. And I know engineers hate it when I talk about feelings because what do feelings have to do with engineering? Well, you don't build code in a vacuum. You're dealing with other human beings day in and day out, and each person you interact with has feelings and opinions, and they care about what you have to say and how you say it. And so, what would happen if you really took the time to listen to your coworkers and be curious and ask them how they feel? And it's not just enough to understand another person's feelings. You need to be able to communicate your understanding of that person's feelings back to them. For example, let's say you want to have a constructive discussion with somebody. Well, you need to use active listening to take the time to reflect your understanding of that person's feelings back to them. There's a lot of arguments that could have been avoided by just making sure the other person felt understood. If you want to give that difficult feedback to somebody, you have to take the time to reflect on their opinion and make sure they are also heard. If not, they won't ever accept the feedback. So I've been talking about empathy kind of at a high level, but how do we apply this to engineering? Well, I'm going to share how we can apply empathy to code reviews, meetings, and engineering leadership. And the first step we all need to start with is active listening. How often are you formulating a response to something somebody is talking to you about halfway between when they've been talking, and you realize you didn't actually listen to half of what they said? So I challenge each of you. So for the next 24 hours, try paying attention to whether you're actively listening to your coworkers, family, and friends. What triggers you to get distracted? For me, it's my cell phone, and so I've started turning D&D on to not have those interrupt me. So what are some things you guys should try? And each of us is different, so you really do need to reflect on what your triggers are and see how you can make active listening more important. But now, let's go and take in some engineering-specific applications of empathy, starting with code reviews. So, here is a prime example of bad feedback from Linus Torvald, the founder of Linux. Anybody who thinks the above is A, legible, B, efficient, or C, particularly safe, is just incompetent and out to lunch. And mind you, this was actually just a small subsection of his comment, and one of the more polite parts that didn't include cursing. This is actually on the internet. You can search for this. And I know this is an extreme example, and I'm hoping your code review comments will never look something like this. But how many of you have gotten a code review comment that started with, "Why didn't you?" Why didn't you remove this variable? Why didn't you just return here? Have you ever felt good being on the receiving end of a sentence starting with that phrase? I certainly don't. But you know what? This is just one example. But if you instead rephrase the question to be more curious and empathetic, the next person would be much more likely to listen to what you had to say. So, what if instead you said, "I don't see the variable XYZ being used in this code. Should it be removed?" The rephrasing aligns with the code reviewer's objective, which is to be providing suggestions and having this be a learning experience and not about giving orders. And remember, a lot of this is being done in GitHub on text, and text has a negative bias. So take a moment to reflect on the language you use and how you'd feel if that was a comment you received. But empathy isn't just for the code reviewer, though. It's actually on the requester and the submitter of the code review as well. And I know, you have just gotten your code done on a feature, you're ready to move on, the product manager is harassing you to start scoping the next thing, and you just want to get your code done and out the door. And you just want to get through this pull request. However, what if you instead think with empathy? Remember, your code reviewers, they didn't go on this couple-month coding journey with you. And so they need context about what you're trying to solve and how to solve it. So leave links to PRDs and architecture documents. And almost think of it like a fact-gathering mission. What if each PR you created, you treated it with the perspective that in a year, you were looking at that PR to find a bug in that code, and you wanted to know what it did and what some of the gotchas were. Would your PRs have enough information to do that? Hey, if you do that, you're not only just helping your code reviewers now, you've now also created an awesome artifact for yourself in the future. And I know, I've been focusing specifically on code reviews and feedback, but empathy really applies broadly as well. As engineers, you're constantly providing feedback and trying to get agreement on technical architectures, design docs, product requirements, and schedules with not just other engineers, but non-technical coworkers as well. And empathy can be applied to all of those situations to make them more collaborative and effective. So there's always tension between engineering product, and a lot of times that's healthy. But a lot of times it can also degrade into unproductive discussions where people are just speaking at each other. I literally saw this happen for 10 minutes in a meeting the other day. Two people were arguing the same point at each other and had no idea. But what if you take a step back and notice that when you start getting frustrated and arguing, instead of digging in and you keep going, you think about it with empathy. Like all of your coworkers and yourself have a shared goal of creating an amazing product that's meaningful. So can you align to that goal and see how another's differences are possibly just two sides of the same coin? And I've talked a lot about, code reviews, so now I want to talk about meetings. How can we apply empathy to team meetings? Well, first, do you notice that one person is doing all the talking and others are hardly speaking up? Well, encourage the more quiet team members to share their opinion and make sure they have a voice. And when somebody does share their opinion, do make sure they get credit for it. One of the challenges with women is our ideas can actually get passed up in meetings. And then when a man shares the same opinion a couple minutes later, it can be recognized. So if you see that happen, be an ally and speak up and make sure the first person who gave the idea gets credit. And finally, make sure you're setting clear meeting agendas. And if a decision needs to get made, send materials out to read ahead of time. And you might want to wonder, what does that have to do with empathy? Well, everyone processes new information differently. Personally, I like to read things and learn about them and process them and go away and do something else and then come back and discuss it. Some people want to share their ideas and discuss it right away. But hey, I've come up with many more ideas during a civilization succession with my husband than I have right on the spot when discussing things. And so, when you're setting up meetings, realize that people do have different ways of processing and make sure to set up a successful meeting by allowing people the time to process. And hey, if you're a manager, you want to take that skill to the next level. And you can figure out how each of your individual reports best processes data. Then you can empower them to get their job done efficiently. So I started talking about managers. So I want to talk a little bit about leading with empathy. And especially now with everything that's going on, I think leading with empathy is more important than ever. So ask your employees how they're doing and actively listen to them. And even if you aren't a manager, this is for leaders in all senses of the word. So if you're a team lead, go ask your coworkers how they're doing. Empathy can really gain you a greater awareness of the needs of other people. And by understanding what really drives your team, you can align that with your company goals. But it's an individual thing for each and every person on your team. And you also really need to engage your team, especially now, on why the things we're working on are important and meaningful. And you can't just tell them. Again, it's about engaging people in dialogue to understand that they're aligned with the vision and really understand what concerns they may have. And, you might think, oh, that means I'm going to walk away with a laundry list of things I have to change or improve that I might not be even able to. But the real value here is that your employee feels listened to and heard. A lot of times, you don't even have to fix anything. Your employee just wants to know that you're there to listen to them and you're going to ask questions, be curious, and validate what they're going through. And then another thing now is be vulnerable. We can admit things are hard right now, but we also need to lead with hope and focus on the things we can control and move forward on. But, especially now, I think it's really important that we share with our employees who have kids or elderly families to take care of that it's okay to take the time to take care of your family and kids. And you understand they might not be 100% productive. But you know what? Don't just tell them that. It's about, don't just tell them that. Make sure to align your schedules with that as well. And finally, admit if you make a mistake and encourage turning it into a positive learning experience and really encourage the same on your team. If one of my team members brings down the site, I'll share a story of when I've had the same thing happen in the past to me and how we learned from it and improved processes. By sharing your mistakes and in focusing on the improvements and the learnings, your employees realize it's okay for them to share theirs. And it can also lead to a culture of learning. So, what I've covered is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to empathy in engineering. And it's a skill that we can get better at with time and daily practice. So I hope each of you will take some time today to take one thing you learned and apply it, not just once, but a little bit on a daily basis. Consider putting it on your to-do list or calendar. By engineering with empathy, we can really create happier and more productive teams that produce better products, as well as providing a space where diverse team members can thrive. And with empathy, we will create these companies of the future that create technologies that truly fulfill the needs of our diverse world population. And as the coronavirus shows, that's a future that we need today more than ever. Thank you. Any questions? Cool. Thank you.